Hello and welcome to the latest episode here of the Business Growth Series. My name is Dustin Luther and I'm with Dun & Bradstreet, and super excited to have Dex Deboree here of Los York. He is a local startup founder here, co-founder of Los York, and really just excited today just to hear his growth story. Clearly, I've been walking through your offices here. It's a beautiful location you have here, beautiful spot. You've clearly seen some good growth. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what you guys do and a little background on Los York.
Sure. So we're a content agency, which, simplest way to describe that is we've taken the traditional advertising agency model and the traditional commercial production model, and we've combined them into one thing. So rather than kind of bolting the two things on together, we've truly built this sort of integrated model where it's collapsed a lot of layers, and that's really done through a lot of hyphenates. Everybody here kind of wears more than one hat and has more than one sort of skill or talent to their name, and that's allowed us to kind of take strategy all the way through to a delivery of an executionable item with a very lean and nimble team.
Interesting. Now, so this content world is somewhere that I'm fascinated with. I live in it myself, and I know working at a big company, we do often struggle, even internally, with, sometimes we're on campaigns and the synergy and making sure everybody's kind of on board unless it really comes from top down. What are some ways that you guys are, what do you say, like kind of working through some of these layers and collapsing? What does that mean? I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to, first and foremost, the talent. Talent really coming from multiple worlds, which probably feeds into a later question, but that's probably our hardest challenge, is finding talent that, gets traditional advertising, but then also gets production. And usually, the two worlds were very siloed and separate, and even within traditional advertising, you look at a traditional ad agency and it's sort of built, organizationally to be very departmental. So you have strategy, you have creative concepting, you have production, you have media, and then you hire a production company to do the rest. And we've literally taken all those disciplines and molded them into one thing, and it's largely by taking strategists and inviting them into the creative process and finding creatives that can actually do strategy. So taking that and then, so for us, for example, there, a lot of the campaigns that I've done with Jordan Brand or, Nike or a couple of other clients that we work with, I've literally done the strategy myself and then concepted it as a traditional creative director, agency creative director, written it myself. So art directed it, wrote it, did the strategy, and then literally direct it on set all the way through production. Usually that's 5 or 6 different roles, and for us it's 1, maybe 2 roles.
That's fascinating.
And it's it's helped really solve an obvious financial gap in terms of how videos have proliferated, but yet budgets haven't proliferated or resources available. But I think more importantly, it's kind of collapsed the sort of communication gap, and it's kept ideas. If I'm working as a strategist and I'm coming up with an initial insight, and then I'm literally on set directing that, I'm making damn sure my insight stays really pure, versus it being sort of passed down these layers and this game of telephone kind of watering it down.
Which definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
So give me a little background just on how old are you guys and how did you get started?
Sure. On the 19th of this month, we're 4 years, is our anniversary. We actually acquired an existing commercial production company, my partner and I. It literally kind of happened overnight. That's a whole nother story. But we bought it from the guy that founded it. And it was a commercial production company, very largely based in graphics and design. Did live action production, but it had a heavy emphasis on design, and so it was a bit of a self-contained company in the sense that they would produce things from soup to nuts. Like if they went out and produced a shoot, they'd literally bring it in house, do any kind of graphics or design on it, do the finishing in flame, and then conform it and output it. So they already collapsed a few production layers already, so that was sort of born out of it. And then myself and my partner had sort of come from these varied backgrounds of, I'd run other production companies, so I was versed in television commercial production, but I'd also, I'd been a career writer. I've written a couple of movies and TV shows and plays, and started off as a journalist. So I was coming from a conceptual background, and I had very early on been kind of on this tangent about really owning the idea and starting the idea, even though I was very versed and grew a career out of producing. I was always, because I was a creator, I was always into like, well, what if we took more? What if we were more proactive? And what if we took more ownership? What if we actually created ideas? And early on, 7 or 8 years ago, I did a marketing campaign for EA Games as a production company, but we literally concepted the whole thing from soup to nuts. And at the time, it was unheard of. Like, production companies just didn't do that. They hired agencies to do that.
Yeah.
Agencies hired us to produce it. But we did the whole thing, and it worked incredibly well. And for me, it was very fulfilling. And so from that experience, and then my partner, had owned a production company, way back when, that kind of spawned a lot of companies that are in existence today. And then he had launched a few tech startups and app companies. And so he had sort of been in this, entrepreneur space. And so combining those two things, we came into a production company. We weren't going to be happy just like sitting back and being a vendor. Yeah. We needed a bigger role. And right around that same time when we took over, very early on, we noticed, because we had sort of taken over this company that was having issues and it was sort of doing things the old way, and the old way wasn't working anymore. So in looking at it, there was a bunch of debt, and it wasn't working. And so when we came in, we were sort of forced to go, what's the problem? What's the problem here? And doing that, we became very inquisitive, and we would work with other ad agencies and a range of clients, and we kept feeling like things are broken. They're going to continue to break even more. There has to be a better way. And that sort of started us on our quest to like evolve into what we've become.
No, that's fascinating. And I hear that a lot when I talk to people for this series. It's like, and it's fascinating. What was that problem that you were looking to solve, right? Like you said, it felt like a broken system that maybe even people inside of it didn't see as broken, right? Like, but you as you're kind of, that's the entrepreneur, I think. Sometimes you see things and you're like, okay, something's not efficient enough. It's just there's some gridlock there that doesn't make sense. Anyway, I find that fascinating. Very cool.
Me too.
So one of the things I like to do early on in an interview is ask people for a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Real quick on each, I'd love just to hear your idea for the kind of, pretend like I'm an investor. I'll put on an investor hat. What are the strengths of Los York? Would you say?
Well, how much money do you have, first of all? You're an investor.
Yeah. Well, you never know.
So, I think the greatest strength is that we've really pioneered a space in solving problems that every brand is starting to face. 4 years ago when we were, talking about this sort of hypothesis, if you will, and we floated it by a few brands, they're like, we don't have that problem. It's fine. Everything we're doing is, nothing's broken. Like, what are you what is a content agency? Like, what's the problem? Like, what you're offering is like, it's not necessary. And literally over the years, and especially in the last, 6 to 9 months, the phone's ringing a lot, and brands are like, we need exactly what you do. So I think our biggest strength is literally solving that problem of delivering really high value, quality content across 360 spectrum of where brands really need to deliver to their consumers.
Very cool. How about some weaknesses?
Probably the ability to acquire the right talent. That it's I'd call it probably more of a challenge, but it is a weakness in the sense of it we don't have it figured out. And part of our strategy on figuring out is kind of adopting this mindset of being educators. My partner and I had dawned on us maybe 6 or 7 months ago, because we've been doing this for a while, and we've hired traditional agency people, we've hired production people, and we've hired all these different people and tried to fit them in and hoped that they might bring something to the table that would help us grow or evolve. And what we've come to learn is that it's far more about finding people that have a certain DNA, and a certain skill set, and hopefully a hybrid of skill sets. But usually we have to teach them how to be like these multi-hyphenated, talents. They don't come in fully baked because they're not coming from another content agency. They're coming from one world or another, and we have to turn them into something that's both.
That's fascinating. How about, and I want to get back to that, especially the leadership side of that there. But what would you say, strengths, opportunities, weaknesses? So I didn't talk about opportunities.
Yeah. So, I think our biggest opportunities is working with brands that truly understand the problem and are truly looking for the right solution. I think, as I said, that the phone rings a decent amount now, which we're blessed by and grateful for. But a lot of times it's brands saying, "Hey, we have a problem. Can you guys fix it?" And then they proceed to tell us how they want us to fix it, and we're like,
Yep.
"But that's the problem. You're trying to fix it in the wrong way." So the biggest opportunity, I think, is still out there with a lot of brands that are going to come to terms or the realization of like, oh shit, the things are really broken, and I'm open to not being the expert or not, demanding that things be fixed in the right way because I don't know how they should be fixed. And that's really, where we come in and thrive.
That's fascinating. Yeah, no, it makes great sense. And what would be the threat to this business?
Threat. I think maybe huge holding companies that that have a lot of resources to be able to transition their organization. But I in the same breath that I say that, we've seen a lot trying to in the last couple of years, and then, no disrespect to any of them, but what we've always said, time and time again, is that it really it's less of a logistical strategic play, and it's much more of a DNA thing. Like it's one thing to say, well, if somebody over here speaks French and somebody over here speaks Italian, if we merge them together, we'll speak this sort of French-Italian combo. But it's like, you can say that and you can try that and it can make sense on paper, but fundamentally, like, if there's not a sort of an essential DNA that understands what that common language is, it doesn't really matter how much you throw at it. You're still not going to get it.
I totally can see that. And like you said, it comes back in many ways to the talent and getting the right people.
Yeah.
Which especially an organization like yours, where you've created this hybrid and a new model, that completely makes sense. I'd love to dive just a little bit more into how are you going about finding people?
That's a great question.
Right?
I don't know the answer to that question. Every which way but loose. People hitting me up on LinkedIn. I probably shouldn't say that because now I'm going to get inundated with a couple of recruiters that we work with. A lot of word of mouth. So it's really, we don't have the perfect formula. I mean, we tried a lot of different things, and there isn't really one thing that's perfect.
So maybe what do you look for? How about that? If somebody does reach out, like what makes you go, okay, that guy might have the DNA that can work with us. Like, we should follow up, because I'm guessing 9 out of 10 people or something, you go, yeah, I could see why you'd want to work here, but it's not going to work.
Yeah. It definitely is a very spiritual thing, and I don't mean that in a religious way, but it's like there's a sort of a tone of voice that someone will reach out with, or you'll see it in their body of work. Big lighthouse signs, kind of, if you will, are the brands that they've worked with, for one. Their experience in working with brands and projects that are very culturally relevant and culture defining puts them in sort of a headspace to sort of get a certain element of what we're about. So that's a part of it. The way in which they kind of conduct themselves or speak is definitely a big part of it. Another part of it is, whether they're creatives, producers, doesn't really matter. People that we sort of see have had this very eclectic background in terms of like when we find producers that, literally have been at production companies and then agencies and then a digital agency and back to production, that's, if they've left, if they've done that every year, then maybe not such a good sign, but somebody that's spent their career kind of moving around and pushing themselves to learn new things, and someone that has literally successfully, that's the important word, sort of adapted to new environments, that's someone that, okay, they could adapt to our environment. And given that they've had this sort of varied background, they're going to understand the variances in terms of what we do.
That's very cool. No, it's interesting because it is hard. I hear that again and again. Like, hiring becomes so critical for creating a good culture, and you can't and it takes time, and it's not trivial. And I'm fascinated to hear how your thoughts were on kind of what kind of people you're looking for in that. It's different. I was talking to a bunch of people in a totally different space who were doing federal contracting, and how they think about hiring is so different than I'd say you're in a very creative space, right? You've got to get these creative, but people who have the production skills, or the kind of organizational skills. It's fascinating. It's good stuff.
It's sort of a soup. There isn't a perfect set sort of structure, but you kind of mix it around and look at the ingredients and piece them together.
So don't have a ton more time here, but wanted to just kind of get in. Can you tell us about one campaign that you thought, I'd love to hear one campaign that you guys were working on that went really well and kind of why you thought it went well. Yeah. And then one that just either was campaign or some way you went out trying to get new customers or something you went, I tried that and we learned so much, but it was probably a fail in and of itself.
Highlight campaign, I'd say the Mellow 12 campaign for Jordan, and it was for Carmelo Anthony's 12th shoe, and we had sort of, we started with this idea of, how do we do something for him? He's been in the league for a long time as a veteran. He's a very public figure. He takes a lot of heat, gets a lot of criticism. He's very outspoken. He's very passionate. All that are pluses, but it makes it, a little bit of a tricky terrain to traverse a little bit, because if you're too verbose or you make certain statements and they put it in the context of all these other things that are out there, and suddenly it gets twisted around.
Exactly.
So they, I sat down with the brand, who, I have a really good relationship with Desmond Marzette, who runs advertising over there. We've done a few things together, and he and I sort of sat down and he's like, I'm really playing with this idea of doing something that is kind of back to basics, like something that's just raw and about basketball versus, some hyped up, fictional story or glamorized or, whatever it may be. And so taking out that, I kind of took that and ran with it a little bit and started saying, what if we not only went back to basics of basketball, but what if we made it very personal? Like, what if we took it back to the basics of when he learned to play the game type thing? And so together we kind of crafted this idea of like, let's take him actually back to Baltimore where he grew up, and let's set, a very basic, premise of him playing basketball back to his roots with no glitz, no shine, no fabrication to it. And then once we kind of got to this sort of soft, rough idea, the next insight that I had was, let's if we're going to be authentic and if we're going to go really make it personal for Carmelo, it's like, let's sit down with him. Instead of us coming up and baking this campaign and then sending it to him or telling him to show up on set one day and he doesn't have any idea what we're doing and shooting him, we're like, let's send him the treatment and like when it's rough and raw and get his thoughts and actually get his input. And so we did, and it was awesome. He responded really well to it. He had a bunch of great ideas. He's like, let's go to this rec center where I very first learned to play ball when I was 8 years old. It's really rough. Yeah. It's in a hard neighborhood, but that's where I grew up.
And you'll see it.
Yeah, and that's true. And then the last part was like, if we want to make it personal, like let's bring my son into it because he's my inspiration, he's my motivation. And so we ended up crafting this piece that was shot in this rec center where he learned to play basketball. We included his son sort of at the end, like he goes through this practice session where he's kind of warring with himself. And then he gets to the end where he just runs out of steam, and then his son comes in, and then it inspires him to pick the ball back up and keep going. It's very simple. It's a very simple story, but we ended up shooting had huge content teams out shooting all over Baltimore and capturing people and the murals and all this rich context of the city. And it was a 360 campaign, so everything we went and captured was on digital, social, was a TV spot, like everything was sort of self-contained based on a certain look and told a very cohesive story. But because we had involved Carmelo, he was really connected to it. And so in the brand contracts with athletes, they usually agree to like participate in some form or fashion, and I think he was obligated to post a piece on his own social channels just to help promote it, and he pushed out 37 pieces of content on his channels because he was like, this is my campaign. Exactly. And it was like he co-created it. He was a creative on it. So
he's invested in its success. I can totally hear it.
Exactly.
I love it.
So that gets at a lot of ideas of like not only like an interesting influencer strategy, but it really gets to this idea of like telling authentic stories and really involving your subjects, especially when they're like celebrities or athletes, when they have a story to tell and they're passionate and they have a fan base that wants to hear their story, versus it just being a traditional advertising campaign or a story that we make up because we're trying to impress people. But literally, this is real elements to the story. We're going to share it with you. I think people really respond to that.
That's good stuff. How about somewhere along the line where you'd go back and you go, gosh, I tried something, it didn't work. I'd understand if you wouldn't want to talk about a brand. That's why I was going. Maybe just as a strategy, for working with people, growing your business. Is there some time you can go back and go, we bit off more than we can chew with this particular?
The one example that comes to mind is, I think, definitely won't mention the brand, but we recently did a huge like soup to nuts branding exercise, and we crafted a strategy to launch a brand new brand, and everything we did, I stand behind and I'm proud of, and that part worked, but the mistake I think that we made was we were a little bit entrusting in this sort of startup to make good on their word. So I think my lesson on that was literally, I'm a man of my word, and if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I think anybody that you ask would back that up, because I feel like that's kind of all you got. You can do great work and you can make a lot of money and you can be successful, but at the end of the day, like if you can't stand behind the things that you say, the rest of it's kind of meaningless. Anyway, so we worked with that brand, and we're very entrusting on a lot on the financial side and commitments that were made, and they didn't come through on it. We did the work, they used the work, we published the work, we put it out there, and they didn't come through on it. So that was a mistake in maybe not demanding a little bit more money up front.
Then it makes the cash flow stuff hard if you put a lot of your own time and resources and whatnot into it.
So I won't do that
again. I believe it. So there's tons more I could dive into. I really would, but I don't want. But we only got so much time here. So really want to thank you, Dex, for just letting us come into your office here, chat a little bit about your growth story. It's fascinating. You guys have a great story here. And if there's somebody did want to reach out to you and contact you, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is you mentioned, people potentially hire, looking, I'm guessing you guys are always looking for more qualified people coming through. How should they reach out to you? What's the best way to
There is talent at losyork.tv is the best way, because that goes to a range of people. And I definitely will see it. But that's far better than just reaching out to me directly, because I can't respond to every email. But that way, that will make sure that it gets handled properly.
And how about the company in general? If somebody just want to learn more about you guys, are you active on social, or you?
We're everywhere. So however they want to do that, and if a brand client
look for Los York
wanted to pick my brain or ask me more questions or whatever, like they could obviously reach out to me, no problem.
Well, it's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. On behalf of the whole Dun & Bradstreet team here, we love these stories, and it's really fun to get in here and hear it from these founders, co-founders, people who are really growing their companies and doing a great job, and hearing their stories. I think it's a inspiration for a lot of other entrepreneurs as they're trying to figure out how do they package their own ideas in a way that they can really create success and keep this process going. So
Cool.
thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. My pleasure.